Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Detroit Institute of Arts Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Christine Mark, the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development. Thank you for joining us today. Our screening is Last Train Home, exploring the world's largest human migration. This special event is limited to the first 350 guests and will be available through Sunday, May 1st. A link to the film and password has been provided in your comments section. If you have any trouble accessing the film or have a question for our curator, please leave a comment on this Facebook post or in the public comments section on YouTube by logging into your account using your Gmail address. Although this film is available to you online, the Detroit Film Theater is open, and general admission to the museum is free for residents of Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County. To introduce today's film, Community Engagement Manager Amanda Harrison is joined by film curator Elliot Wilhelm. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Thanks, Christine. And thanks to everybody watching at home. We're excited to have you join us for this special screening of Last Train Home. This film follows one family's journey home during the world's largest migration, when 130 million Chinese workers leave the cities to return to their home villages for the Chinese New Year. Elliot, will you introduce the family that we'll be watching today?
Sure, Amanda, and how are you? Nice to be here again. This is a family that I think a lot of people will recognize. The name is the Zhang family, very common name in China, but they're in a very difficult situation, which is known by millions of people in that country. Two parents and two children. The parents in the family have to have work, and for the jobs that they were able to get, they need to travel away from the rural village that they originally live in, which is in Sichuan province. And they have to actually take jobs that are thousands of miles away in another city, which is an industrial port city where things are constructed like iPhones and circuitry and all kinds of manufactured goods and clothing, and shipped from that port to the rest of the world. Now, bear in mind, this film, Last Train Home, was made about this family. The filmmaker decided to settle on one family in particular rather than to try and film many families, because there are so many families who could have been the subject of this film, that to try and include too many and to not really film the relationships between these individuals in a way that was recognizable to us would have been counterproductive. And I think the filmmaker made the right choice in picking one family as an example of what was bound to be a difficult situation, but I don't think any of them understood how serious, or had any control certainly over how serious their situation was going to be. Suffice to say that because of rules and regulations that date back to the Mao era and the one-child policy, which then in China became a two-child policy and is now sort of expanding to a three-child policy. At the time the film was made in 2009, there were many laws in place preventing children from residing and getting education permits and so on in these big cities. If they were migrant workers who were going into these cities to take manufacturing jobs, but came from sort of a farm, rural situation, the kids had to remain back where they came from. And even some of the laws state they're to be cared for by their grandparents. So the family structure is sort of built into the law. In this case, only the grandmother is alive, taking care of a young teenage girl who is angry at her parents, understandably, for being missing in action for almost the entire year, feeling that the mom and the dad don't care about her because they're not there. We hear in the U.S. hear about our parents having to work and never seeing the kids, or working 2 jobs and never seeing the kids, or a single parent having to work 3 jobs and not being home. This is literally a situation in which the parents are more than 2,000 miles away
Wow.
for everything except 4 or 5 weeks of the year. And this teenage girl is terribly confused and upset by it. And one can explain, well, I have to do this because we have to send you money. We have to get you educated. If you don't get an education, and you can't get one where we live and where we have jobs, if you don't get an education and you don't do well in your studies, then you are going to end up like us. You're going to end up impoverished and having a family that you have to be separated from all the time. So the urgency to try and get your children to do as well as possible and to move up in society is there. But kids are still kids, and kids want their mom and dads around as much as they may want to complain about their mom and dad at various times. The resentment builds. And in this case, the time, and in the case of millions of people in China, the time that they do get to spend with either one or both parents is the same time for everyone in the country, and that is the Lunar New Year, which happens in January or February and officially lasts, I think it's 15 days. And travel time is very often built in ahead of those 15 days and after those 15 days. And that travel time is really necessary, as the movie points out, because we're talking about 130 million people minimum out of a country of 1.4 billion who are going to try to make a lengthy journey to a rural setting from a city, or vice versa, in exactly the same period of time. And that travel is generally by train. And the situation of trying to get on a train is depicted in the centerpiece of this movie in a way that appears to be a scene from one of the many disaster movies that we've seen, in which staged huge crowds of human beings are fleeing from some unknown enemy or menace. But in fact, these are people trying to get home to be united with their families. And a kind of panic ensues when the electrical grid goes down at one point in this film, and the trains stop moving, and people are overcome with being in crowded conditions. If you've ever been on a subway that is at rush hour, say in New York, and it's hot and the train is late or delayed for some reason, or the others aren't running, and you're in this horrible kind of crowd, which you're elbow to elbow, closer than elbow to elbow. Imagine 130 million people all in a situation like that for days. This family, the father, the mother, and the teenage daughter are all trying to make the pilgrimage together. And all it does, of course, is increase tensions to such a degree that they reach the boiling point, which they do about halfway through the film.
It's a really intimate setting, Elliot. It honestly, for the director to be able to get that close, I mean, both physically and emotionally with this family, as I think you were about to talk about, is really astonishing. What are some of the challenges do you feel the director had in getting access to this family and getting access to their working conditions? That was really surprising to me as well. And what more can you tell us about the director himself?
Well, Lixin Fan's greatest challenge, I think, as with any documentary filmmaker who's going to insert himself into the very fabric of a family and get that family to agree to be in front of the camera, not perform in front of the camera, but merely exist as they normally would, as much as possible in front of the camera, is his major task. The actual cinematography is important, but none of it, the sound recording, the cinematography, and the editing, which is done later, because he doesn't know what the story is really going to be until he photographs what happens spontaneously in the movie. And this is with any family setting, in any documentary, anywhere on Earth. The central issue is to gain the trust of the family, to allow this individual, in this case, Lixin Fan, to become a member of the family. There are a few times in the movie, not that many, but a few times, and he left them in there on purpose, in which a member of the family will be so distraught over something that they will address the camera, they will address the filmmaker. Stop filming me. At one point, one of the characters said,
They do get really intimate.
This is my life. I don't care about your, blank, blank movie right now. And that is to be believed. It makes the film all that more powerful because
it really does.
It's not a showboat filmmaker. This is
And
somebody who's.
It raises some interesting questions for me too, because the director is so intimately involved in this family and sees some really difficult moments. There's one scene in particular that stands out to me that our viewers should be warned about. It was hard to watch. And what kind of decisions do you think go through a director's mind? This could apply really to anyone when they're deciding whether or not to keep filming in those moments that something's happening, or maybe the director feels that they should intervene when it's a scary situation. How do you think they make those judgment calls?
Sort of the oldest worry and the oldest dilemma in the history of documentary filmmaking, and it never really goes away. And that is there a moment that you're encountering in which you should intervene, not as a filmmaker, but as a human being? There was a movie made about documentary filmmaking back in 1968, in which a character played by an actor in the movie in Chicago photographs a traffic accident. And there's a woman who's clearly severely injured, who's sort of hanging out of the car. And the assistant, the sound person, says, "We got to go help her." And he says, "Not until I get the shot." And that seems like an extremely artificial moment to most moviegoers, because our normal instinct would be, there's a person who's hurt, help the person. But what are you there to do? A. B, if it's a crime, are you tampering with the crime scene? And what is your moral obligation to the audience to whom you were trying to tell a huge story? This director, for example, was using this one family, and I don't mean using in the sense that he was taking advantage of them unfairly, but was filming the story of this one family's difficult life under Chinese restrictive laws. Filming this one family's the repercussions of it on these very specific people, and so his movie was a huge story, and I'm sure that he felt at any number of moments, if I intervene here, if I change the story, then what good is what I'm doing? What good is it to photograph these people if I have a predetermined outcome of some kind that I'm trying to direct in one direction or another?
That makes sense,
however,
it's
Amanda,
one
is
family,
very different from a moment in which somebody is being hit, which I think is the scene you're referring to. What do you do in that case?
I wasn't going to give it away.
and in that moment, I'm sure a lot of other questions take place. Like, is it somebody, hitting somebody else, not in a terribly injurious way, just like almost a severe spanking? In this case, you'll have to judge for yourself when this moment happens. But what's critical about the scene, and I'm sure the director realized this as he assembled the movie, is that moment in the movie, and you'll know it when you see it, is critical to how much repressed sadness, anger, frustration, longing, unrequited love for other members of the family, in being able to express oneself without having to worry that later on all of those feelings will mean nothing because they're all going to be taken away by these laws that the state has imposed. And the typical teenage things of, oh, my parents don't love me, they don't pay attention to me, they don't understand me. And the parents, likewise, their converse feeling is, my kid isn't grateful. This girl is ungrateful for all the things we've done to her. And the answer is, you've never done anything for me. I never see you. And how do you explain that, in a sense, this is not your choice? I could stay with you. I could stay with you here on the farm and we could all starve to death together, which in a sense is kind of the truth as this film portrays it. And I can't take you with me to where I do work because it's illegal to do so, and you would not be able to go to school. You would not be able to get an education. This is a scene in which it comes to a head that a political structure, a nation's political structure, is destroying families, is destroying the possibility of hope, is destroying lives. And I'm not saying it's universal
Well,
in
and so
any
very
country, but
traditional Chinese values too, because the family has always seemed to be the center of those values, and they're
and
having
there's nothing wrong with that. But the laws as we see them in 2009, at least, the social structure, the fact that these migrant workers are treated almost as subhuman in the cities in which they work, and their children are not allowed to be given the things that they need unless they're separated from their parents, is a kind of nightmarish, almost Franz Kafka like situation in which the kid will say, it's the parents' fault. The parents will say it's the kid's fault, when the fault is something so much bigger than just the normal parent-child arguing, particularly when a kid begins to get to the age where she wants to make her own decisions and she wants
Mhm.
to be a grown-up. The parents would probably like nothing more than to be able to say, yeah, you can make your own decisions. But she has almost no choices, as we see in the film, about those decisions being things that are going to end up in a better life for her. And how to explain, we know best, honey, what you should do, when in fact someone else, a whole system, is actually making that decision, and the parents have to rationalize it. And that makes the parents incredibly guilty feeling and sad, and the weight on their shoulders, as seen in this movie, is aging them
Mhm.
rapidly, and it's moving them apart from each other. It almost seems as if the system is designed to break families up and to separate them, and to make them fail at everything except exactly what the state would have them do. Um, but the filmmaker, while he points out very, very clearly how the system does this, I think is much more concerned with its human impact and its effect on one family. And as we said in the beginning, a lot of people will recognize this family because they have the same parent-child differences as you'd find anywhere.
It is. It's
But
so
the
relatable,
consequences,
Elliot.
yeah, but the
It makes you
consequences are not
human.
relatable. Yeah,
Right.
because the
It's a
consequences
much more extreme
yeah,
situation.
don't allow you to go out and um, be the entrepreneur in certain social strata that one would imagine one could be. And you can see that this filmmaker, Lixin Fan, has remained very interested in this subject: how to distinguish yourself, how to escape this kind of an oppressive, almost, why bother with life except just to survive it, if there's no possible way for me to lift myself up out of what situation we're in. I mean, we've all heard the expression. I came to this country, America, with 5 cents in my pocket, and I ended up owning stores across the country, and or building a publishing brand, or America was always considered the place where you could dream these things and you could do them.
Well,
And those
Elliot,
dreams don't exist, it would seem, based on this one family, rural
it does seem
raised
that
family. They don't those dreams don't exist there, but the knowledge
the
of them exists, and it's what makes everyone so utterly depressed. The
the
filmmaker made a
situation.
film in 2013 called I Am Here, which is about a bunch of young boys, Chinese boys, who are trying out for a nationally broadcast TV talent show in the desperate hope that by winning this contest, they're going to become famous. We all dream of that, I guess. All kids do. But here, it's a way out of the situation you see in this movie, which seems inevitable for certain groups of children. And his newest movie, which he's still editing right now, is another metaphor almost, even though it's a real documentary about a real person, about the first blind Asian mountaineer to try and climb Mount Everest. And it's called Invisible Summit, but you can see right in the title and right in the concept what an incredible metaphor it is. That what is it you want a person to have to do in order to achieve some sort of success, in order to see a dream through? All of these things against this person.
The film itself, you're right. The storyline is really difficult. This family is challenged with some real difficulties, but at the same time, I think that some of his aesthetic choices, as we can see in a clip that we have from the film, and I wonder what your take is on this, Elliot. I feel like some of the aesthetic choices that he made in this film kind of give us hope throughout a really difficult story that we're learning about. How do you feel about the aesthetic decisions that he's made?
If you're talking about things like this image of a train, and this is the young teenage girl we were talking about in the family who was so angry and so frustrated by the limited choices that she has, and by the lack, as she feels, of parental love. We see this magnificent scenery from the eyes of people who are going from a farm to a city back again, but not stopping in between, seeing magnificent scenery from afar, from God's point of view, or from the point of view of a tourist to this country. But as she looks out the window, it was my feeling that she isn't seeing any of that. She's
Mm.
looking at what she doesn't have. She's looking, some of us can go to a mountain or a seashore, or go to a new city somewhere in the world, and suddenly see new possibilities and hope for our lives, that there's something so majestic and so wonderful and beautiful, and someday I can live there, or I can
Mm.
go there, or I can visit there, or I can explore there. The world is going to be open to me. It depends on what I want to do. I can have hope of doing some of these things. This look in that scene in the train is from someone who understands that she has no possibility of ever seeing any of these places except on an extremely crowded train, in which she's angry and frustrated,
Mm.
and going to be making this trip back and forth for the rest of her life, and is never going to have the opportunities that other people have. This may or may not be absolutely correct, but it's how she feels. It's in a sense, and I hate to say this in recommending a movie, but it's a movie that's almost without hope. it's a fabulous film in that we do get to know real people, and we get to understand that people are like us and we are like them all over the world, but they often have to live in circumstances that are nightmarish. We've all been looking at footage from Ukraine of families that have been completely torn loose from everything that they have. Images that take us back to Europe, World War II, of homes destroyed in a second for no discernible reason, of the death of parents, the death of children in a second, of the loss of everything, of wandering in hopes of getting a train to someplace like Poland or someplace else in Europe, or maybe the United States, which is still the ultimate goal of so many around the world who long for opportunity. This movie is not an isolated, even though it's 1.5 billion people we're talking about. It's not an isolated situation in which families and completely innocent individuals are suffering because of a system that is designed to prevent joy in their lives, and it's a tragedy, and we see it across the globe, and we always try and make things better.
It really does.
Documentary filmmakers are there to show us these things,
Right.
pleasant or unpleasant, and what we take away from them is what we take away from them. And this filmmaker in particular, I think, is an even-handed and really, really observant individual who has shot hours and hours of footage and edited this film down, despite its massive scope and its intimate, character scope. He's edited this film down to 90 minutes. And that in of itself is a miracle when you think of how much is covered and how much we take away. Yeah.
And how much time did he spend with the family? Do we know that?
I don't know, actually, but clearly it was enough time for them to be comfortable with not feeling that the filmmaker was A, an enemy, or B, an intrusion that was causing them to act differently than they would have normally. Now, I happen to believe I'm somebody who is a big fan of documentaries, and I think that there are some filmmakers who are better at doing this kind of insinuating yourself into a family situation than others. I still think that there's no possible way that you can have a movie director, a camera, and a small crew, even if it is small, even if it's just one person, living with you, and to not be aware in some ways that make you somehow act slightly differently, that you're in front of a camera, but not all the time. There are eventually, if a camera person lives with you or a director lives with you, there's eventually a point in which you're not going to be concerned at a particular moment about that. Those are the moments that, by a great director's hand, like this film, like Last Train Home, can be assembled into a complete work in which those things are invisible. It's like looking at a movie set and seeing, things that don't belong there. You cut those things out if they're not relevant, and you leave in the things that are.
Right.
As Elmore Leonard was once asked, how do you write such great, gripping novels with all that great dialogue that you just flip through and you can't put it down? How do you do that? He said, I leave out the boring parts, which is a great line. And in a sense, what I think a filmmaker like this filmmaker does is to leave out the irrelevant parts, leave out the parts in which there's interaction with the camera, or that he feels that the action is being influenced, particularly by the director or by the camera. In the one moment you refer to, in which there's some physical violence that takes place, one of the characters is not only aware of the camera, but addresses the director in anger. Get that out of here. Don't you photograph me. And it's very telling and honest and important that he left that in there, because in a sense it would be a question for us if it weren't there.
Right.
So having it there, acknowledging his presence, acknowledging that this is the process that he's going through, makes the film feel even more mature and makes us want to trust him and his movie even more, which we do. I saw this when we first showed it at the DFT in 2009, and I didn't see it again until last week. And it is, I thought it might be dated because it's 13 years old, but regardless of what the political status of these same laws that are referred to in '09, of what that is right now, doesn't matter, because it's about how human beings react under oppression.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it brings us to an interesting question that we have from our audience. And I'd just like to take a moment to remind our audience at home that this film is available for you to watch at home for free through May 1st. There's a link in the chat box. It's password protected, so please take advantage of that while it's available to you. And Susan wants to know if the director has been attacked essentially by the Chinese government. Has the Chinese government gone after him for, depicting families in this way, or maybe bringing light to some of the difficulties that are being faced in the country?
I don't. First of all, he's still making movies, and
In China or in other places?
well, he's still
curiosity.
shooting pictures in China,
Okay.
but he's Canadian resident most of the time.
Okay.
But nevertheless, he's shooting films, getting them made, getting them distributed. So just like in Iran, which is a country that has a great tradition of filmmaking under really difficult circumstances, both before the revolution in 1976, after the revolution, and now, in which some of the greatest Iranian filmmakers' work has happened within the last 15 or 20 years. Films are being made there, great ones, and on occasion those directors are placed under house arrest. We're told they can't make films, and they find clandestine ways to do it. And in the era in which we now live, there are also clandestine ways of getting a movie out of a country into the view of the world. And those are electronic means that we didn't have prior to digital. You had to actually physically smuggle a print out of the country. Now you can do it, not necessarily on YouTube, but you can do it in other ways, and it is done. And many of these regimes tend to scold publicly and punish. I won't say mildly if you're placed under house arrest and the law says you can't make movies, but you do, and you somehow get out of your apartment. But in the other sense, there is something about the pride of cinema that has allowed many of these filmmakers to get their films shown and to win prizes at film festivals. So the government has to do two things. On the one hand, they have to condemn the film and ban it from exhibition in their own country. On the other hand, look the other way and say, look, we've got these great filmmakers and we allow dissent. So if you say you allow dissent and you have a film that shows the effects of some kind of repression, then you feel people aren't going to say about me, well, I'm a total authoritarian and I have control over everything, but you do in your own country. So the answer is, if you're a good negotiator, you're going to be able to operate under a regime like that, and probably get your film out, and perhaps get authorization by saying that it's something other than what it really is. There are all sorts of ways to do that.
Wow,
but there are other
it sounds like a
filmmakers
very
other filmmakers who have not
PR
been that
plan.
lucky. If you want to make movies, if you're dedicated to it, if it's your life, if it's what you need to do. The great German director Werner Herzog tells his film students right away, if you don't have money, if you have a great story you want to tell, and if you are passionate and you're a great filmmaker at heart, or that you're going to be, steal the camera, steal the film and make your movie, and then pay everybody back afterwards. Now,
The
I'm not
DIA does
advocating
not
this.
endorse
I'm not
that.
advocating,
Right?
right, I'm not advocating this position, nor is this the official position of the Detroit Institute,
The DIA
or
does not endorse
unofficial. It's
anything
not our,
said
it's not
on
our,
this
right.
program.
Okay, we got the disclaimer out of the way. But my point is that writers, filmmakers, artists throughout history have found ways to tell their stories, and that's probably how we should leave it. But that's
Absolutely.
a big part of their struggle, and a big part of what's so demanding about making movies under any system. Even the Hollywood system of old was repressive in its way, and filmmakers found their way around. And so to filmmakers like Lixin Fan.
That's excellent. Well, great question, Susan. Thank you for sharing that. Elliot, I'd love to let our audience get to the film, but are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to share?
Just that the world of documentary filmmaking is so unendingly rich and so important. It's wonderful that there's this parade of brand new documentaries on so many streaming services. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's great and it's important. But at the same time, seek out in places that are not necessarily so bountiful with brand new things some of the great documentaries of the last several decades, and even those that go back to the 1930s and even earlier, to look at the history of documentary. Right now, the Detroit Free Press Documentary Film Festival is happening, partially at the DIA. We're showing some of those films right now, but it is a celebration of the documentary art form. And by looking at films like Last Train Home, which isn't immediately contemporary, although to me 2009 feels pretty contemporary, we learn about how civilization, human beings, societies, laws, everything, how it evolves or devolves. And we have standards for judging what's happening now, as opposed to seeing everything in a vacuum. So just like every other kind of film, I am very, very keen on people seeing important documentary films of the past as well of the present, and certainly of the future. And documentary film has become a really wonderfully visited art form. There are documentary festivals around the world, and one of the best happens here in the United States as well, Doc NYC, which happens usually in November. But I'm getting far afield. Just
well, Elliot,
try and see great ones.
I appreciate you making these films accessible to our audience. I think you're a part of that push to make sure that these films are seen, essentially. And I appreciate your efforts in that, bringing them to us today. Thank you.
My pleasure, Amanda. Thanks.
It's always a pleasure having Elliot on this program. We see a film here. It streams for free every other month. So please join us again in the future. But if you want to come back next week, we will be having a studio demonstration with artist Mary Broadbeck, and that'll be with our studio coordinator, Zach Freeling. So I hope that you can join us for that next week at 1 p.m. And I wanted to thank our producers as well, Gwen and Christine, for working behind the scenes today to make this program a reality. Thank you so much for your efforts. And I hope to see everybody back again next week. Have a great day.